And there we go. We are now recording. So, all right. So again, I'm going to repeat that real quick here. We're going to be talking about how to become a great interviewer and interviewee on podcast. And I'm going to hear from the three guys that are here today to help with this. We've got Travis. Wow, that's loud. Sorry, someone's outside mowing the lawn, and that is like right there. We got Travis, Jesse, and Tyler. They're going to be sharing with us today. So to start off, Jesse, I'm going to start with you. If you don't mind just telling us a little bit about your experience with podcasting and speaking in general, so we can kind of get an idea of where you sit with this, and then we'll kind of jump into the next guys, and then after that, we'll just kind of go into some talking points, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So my experience with podcasting, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this platform. I really appreciate it. My experience with podcasting has been a big learning curve because I'm used to being on stage, like talking to people and training. So these last year and a half has been a learning curve with just sitting down and hearing other people's stories, right? And I'm really enjoying it. So I'm about a year and a half in. I'm coming up on 100 episodes. I'm at 67 episodes. So that's great. And so for me, it's been all about consistency, building a rhythm of success, finding what my voice is in this space, and then interviewing people that I'm a fan of, like really finding people that can have enriching conversations, not just seat fillers, but really talking to people who have a message and know what their message is, and their message brings forth transformation in some kind of way. And so that's what I get to enjoy doing, just sitting back and just asking questions, letting them know that this is not an interview, this is more of a conversation. So just imagine that we're in a coffee house and we're just talking about what we're talking about. You're the expert and I'm just digging into your life, and you get to share whatever you want to share. So I've really been enjoying this whole process of podcasting.
Man, I love that. I've got a lot of questions I'm going to follow up with, but we're going to get through the other introductions first. But I love a lot of what you just said there, so I'm looking forward to diving into that further. Next up, Tyler, love to hear from you. And real quick, by the way, the three guys that I brought on here, you guys have all got unique backgrounds. And I dig that. That's really cool. So anyway, Tyler, love to hear from you, man.
Well, so I've just been absolutely loving podcasting. It's been a highlight of all of my skill sets that I've gained over the last 35 years, kind of similar to Jesse. I grew up on the stage, but I mean, I grew up on the stage. I've been performing since I was 6 years old. And to be able to use all of my technical skills that I learned from stage, from theater, from film and television, even down to the setup, having my backdrop and my lighting, having my mics, knowing how to work with the camera. And to Jesse's point, being able to sit down and treat this like an ADR recording session and just make sure that my levels are good and be the best that I can be for any host that has me on their show, because I want them to look good. If they look good, I look good as a guest. And so I've done everything that I can in my power to use every trick and tool that I've gathered over 35 years to just show up and be here to serve their community. So I'm excited to be here and serve yours again, Alex.
Good stuff, man. Love that. Travis, welcome, man. Another cool background here. And Tyler, I'm excited to dive into a couple things that you just mentioned there once again. And Travis, this guy has Poddex, which is a company that I really enjoy. He asks really great questions, but I'm not going to say everything for you. Travis, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I appreciate being included in this. Podcasting is my everything. So I have a musical background, an extrovert background. So when somebody said that I could put up a mic and talk to people, I was like, sign me up, right? Very, very easy for me. But not everybody comes with that software update of being extroverted. Some people have to grow into becoming an interviewer. They have to learn how to formulate a question, how to listen to plant the next question and make it a conversation. So, I've been editing podcasts for over a decade. I've had multiple podcasts. I help other people with their podcasts. And I accidentally started a business called Poddex where I curate questions that spark great conversations. So, if you're stuck, if you're staring at a blank piece of paper, if you want to differentiate yourself, if you want spontaneity, it's a great tool. And I'm all about right now just reveling in not the sales of the product, but the communication that's happening. I think 2020 taught us a lot of things that were needed to be communicated, right? And I think that the pandemic was terrible, but we're moving forward in the communication about the world and society and culture and different views on if you're right or left. And I think that we can disagree, but we can also communicate effectively and grow. And so communication is like, I think, one of the most important things for us human beings that are all separated. We're all on Zoom. It's very important to me. So podcasting, I think, is a really great opportunity for us to communicate with anyone in the world, share stories, share value, and enrich people all over the world. So I'm all about being a guest. I'm all about being a host and listening, consuming, and helping podcasters grow.
I love that, man. You've done a lot to help podcasters. I remember when I first downloaded the app and then got like the professional version of it. I was just like blown away by the questions that you ask in it. So I'm going to circle back to you on that. But first, so thank you for being here again. Jesse, I'm going to circle back to you about something that you said that really stuck out to me. You talked about being consistent, building a rhythm of success, which I really enjoyed hearing that. And in that process, finding your voice. Can you talk to us about what you've learned about finding your voice in these first 60 to 70 episodes that you've been doing? Can you kind of explain how that process has gone for you?
Yeah. So my motto, one of my mottos is authenticity wins, right? Authenticity always wins. And so, especially in our culture, we've been taught to like manufacture activity or manufacture a brand or manufacture a persona, and people can see through the fake. And if you're a podcaster, people can hear through the fake as well. So my goal is just to show up who I am. Like I'm a son of a pastor who is also a business owner. So faith in business is resonates with who I am, right? And so that comes through. I love people. I love getting to know people's stories. So that kind of comes through as well. And so there are like 5 pillars that I look for whenever I'm scheduling a guest. And there are 5 pillars that I also, when I am a guest, that I put forth, right? So these 5 pillars are this: what is the message, or what is my message? Who needs my message? Why do they need my message? Why am I the one to share this message? And how can this message transform lives? Right? So those are that is my filter for everybody that I bring on. When I do my research, if they don't pass those 5 questions, I don't care how big they are, how many books they've written. If they don't pass those 5 questions, I know that the conversation probably won't be authentic. And also, when I'm being a guest on somebody's show, I always make sure that I hit those 5 questions. Okay, Jesse, this person asked you to be a guest on their show. What is their show about, and how does your message resonate with the audience? What kind of transformation can you bring? Why are you the person to bring that transformation? And not only that, I always look at, okay, can I have a rich conversation with this person? Because if it's not organic, it's not going to work for me.
I really like that. So you talked about this at the beginning, how it's not an interview, it's more of a conversation. Imagine you're sitting in a coffee shop is the way that you put it. And I really like that. And then you talk about these 5 pillars. What is the message? Who needs my message? Why do they need it? Why am I the one to share it? And how will this message change lives? I think that's a powerful filter. And now I'm just wondering, have you ever not gotten this right? Like in 60 to 70 some odd episodes, you ever brought someone on and you're like, uh-oh,
yes,
I made a mistake. Like how were you able to deal with that? Did you use the episode? Was it better just to scrap it? Just walk us through that real quick.
Yeah. So in the beginning, I didn't have those filters. I was just trying to get a rhythm, right? I was trying to develop a rhythm of success and consistency, whatever that looked like for me at the time. So I got it wrong a lot of times. Recently, I got it wrong again. Somebody that came through good on the pre-call, but then on the actual podcast, they were just too talkative, and I really couldn't get my questions in like I wanted to. So I found myself sitting back and listening too much, right? When I could have interjected a little bit more because I didn't want to be quote unquote rude, right? And so that kind of threw me off a little bit as well. And so part of having a conversation is knowing when to talk and knowing when to shut up on both ends, right? And so I didn't do that well. And but I followed up the next day with a powerful interview. So I kind of like canceled that one out, right? And so for that interview, I recorded it video. So I may not use it on my podcast, but I might use it on the show I'm developing. That's going to be a video show where I can just have snippets, right? And so just repurposing that content.
That's really smart. I like that you're still able to use it. You talked about knowing when to shut up and when to talk, right? How were you able to figure that out? Because you record everything on video, so you can kind of get those cues as I could interject here. And do you recommend that, or do you recommend doing without camera? Because some people will recommend different ways. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
For me, I want to see the person, because I'm a rhythm person, especially when I'm doing my research. I'm going back and listen to past interviews. If you have any video, I'm looking at your video to get your speech pattern, to get your rhythm, to know when you're taking breaths and when you're taking breaks. And so now that I have those mental cues, when I'm talking to you, for the most part, I can pick up on it. I can pick up on it. And so like, that's how I pretty much do that. Just really being in tune with the guests, because it's not about me, right? As Travis said, it's not about me. As Tyler said, it's not about us. It's about making sure that the guests look good and we put them in a position to look good, right? And so if we do that, then the content is going to be rich. And the people are going to continue to come back and listen to the podcast and download and whatever else is supposed to happen after that. But it's all about making sure that we have a great, enriching conversation with our guests.
Love that. That's good. So before I move on to Tyler, because I got questions for Tyler, and then I'll move back over to Travis as well. Does anybody have any follow-up questions or thoughts on this before we move along? And I'll open up to anybody who's here who wants to continue asking Jesse a question or have a comment to add to it. Paul, you're raising your hand. Go for it.
Yeah, I'm really curious at what you're saying, Jesse, about like learning the breath movements, because I've experienced that in conversations where I've had guests who are like they have a different kind of style, and they're just talking along, and then all of a sudden, bop, they stop, and you're like, what the hell was that? You're that's it? And now I don't have anything follow up. Like you've left me like just hanging here. And then I'm caught in one of those like, let me see here. I had a next question, rather than it being a flow. And do you have any advice for that on like how to either catch that, or maybe it's what you just said, is just understanding who they are and how they speak?
Yeah, part of that is understanding who they are and how they speak, and understanding what questions you have as well. So knowing, okay, what question might be next, but not really being married to your list of questions, because it is a conversation. So if you were to meet this person in the grocery store, you're not going to have a list of questions. You're just going to go off the conversation cues. So maybe they say something in the conversation that might be off script, and you might be able to ask a question based on what they said, and then that's going to bring you back to the script. So really understanding, again, your guest, their patterns, and not being married to the process, and just really engaging in who they are. And again, for me, I have to have video, or else I can't see the facial expressions. I can't see the breaths. I can't see this. I can't see when they lean back, right? Because all this body language, it lets me know it's a cue to what's about to happen next.
Yeah, it's just as awkward in the grocery store, though. If you meet one of those people who don't know how to like keep a conversation going, sometimes that happens.
Good question, Paul. I really like that. That's good. I took a lot of notes there. I love that. Don't be married to your list of questions. That's good. Barbara, you had raised your hand. Did you want to say something?
Yeah. So I'm listening as a guest. I don't actually host the podcast, but I do believe that. Hey, I do believe that. I'm quiet. There he is. That it's easy to hear through the fake. And my question is, I have so many different messages because of what I've been through in life and what I ended up doing. How do you know which message to bring forward? Like if I'm on a conference about healthcare and all of a sudden a question turns to spirituality, do I, as a guest, try to steer it back to what the original topic was, or do I just let it go to wherever it's heading? That was for Jesse.
Okay, can you provide us a little bit more clarity with your question?
Yeah, so like I've done reality television, and I run a nonprofit, and I've published 9 books on healthcare. So a lot of the podcasts that I try to guest on have to do with healthcare, but then in the process, they start asking about reality television, or about, oh, you have a spiritual thing that happened to you. Let's go down that direction. And I don't know as a guest if I should go with the host, or if I should try to steer it back and say, yes, my lung collapsed, landed on my heart. I went into like cardiac arrest, emergency surgery. Like, where do I take it?
Yeah.
Or how do I bring it back? Or should I just, if that's what they think is good for their audience, do I just let them go on a new direction to talk about reality television when I'm here to talk about healthcare?
Yeah.
And Jesse, do you mind if I jump in and take this just as a guest? I'll give my take on that. Do you mind?
Sure. Go ahead, Tyler.
So Barbie, and then Jesse, I don't mean to cut you off, but I know exactly what you're talking about, Barbie. I've been there as a guest where somebody takes it this way. Now, what I usually ask myself is, is the direction we're going to serve the audience? Because ultimately that's what we're there to do as guests. I'm there to serve the audience of the host. So if somebody wants to jump off, and I'm similar to you, I have this massive, anybody who's on here, Paul knows, Paul's interviewed me. I have so many stories that span 4 decades, from being a child actor to having a stroke that paralyzed me, to my father passing away when I was 6 years old and how it's affected the trajectory of my life, being an actor, being a stuntman, being a safety professional, being a father. I have a very diverse amount of topics that I can talk about. And people who do their research sometimes take me by surprise, because they will throw something from left field where, as you had said, Barbie, you're talking about healthcare and all of a sudden they want to talk about reality TV. If they want to talk about it and it's serving the audience, if you've done your research and you know what their audience needs, you let that conversation go and you just let it go to where it's going to be. If you know that this is just a frivolous question, have an out prepared. So I know people are going to ask me about stunts all the time. I know people are going to ask me about when I was in Carrie or Freddy versus Jason all the time. Usually it doesn't serve the audience, but they want to know. So I've always done my research on what they're looking for. So if you have somebody who is on self-development, I'll go, yeah. And here's one of the lessons that I learned. So one of the things that Les Brown always says, never make a point without a story, never tell a story without a point. I know, I have studied all of my stories. I know what the points of them are, and I know how to expand them out to be a 20-minute conversation so that I'm long-winded and Jesse has to figure out when I'm going to stop. Or I know how to make it a 10-second soundbite and steer the question back. And so as a guest, it's just finding your story, saying it enough times that you know the reason that you're telling it. And if somebody throws this one, how does it serve your audience? So just doing that little bit of research up front when you are going to be a guest on somebody's show. What is their primary demographic of their audience? Who's listening to it? And what is the main point or theme of their show so that you can serve the audience? And then know if you need to take that conversation further or shrink it down. Jesse, your thoughts on it?
Absolutely. Thank you for throwing that. I appreciate that, Tyler. 2 things for you, Barbie. 2 easy things that you can start doing right now. Number one is a mindset shift, right? Your story is your story. It's not pockets of stories. Like, this is your life. There's only one Barbie, right? This is your life. So don't look at your topics as different stories. It's just a continuum, right? That's number one. Number 2 is, if someone asks you a question that's not on topic for the podcast, find the threaded connectivity between what you're talking about and what they're asking. And like Tyler said, bring it back. If that question does not serve the audience, find a way to make it serve the audience, right? And you can do that by finding the threaded connectivity, by finding those jewels or those points that Tyler was talking about, to bring it back, right? Because just like a guest can be long-winded, a host can as well, right? And so sometimes as a guest, you have to facilitate the conversation too.
That's good. That's really good. Barbie, does that help you out?
Yeah, that helped a lot. Thank you so much to both of you.
Good. I saw all the podcast hosts smile when you said that sometimes hosts talk a lot, by the way, Jesse. As soon as you said that, the whole panel of everybody like smiled, because they're like, yeah, we've done it or seen it. But thanks for that, Jesse. I want to move on to Tyler here, and we'll kind of bounce around, do some popcorn style here as well. Tyler, something that you mentioned is that you're using all of your skills in one place, and you've done acting, you've done everything. I'm not even going to go back down through the list. People just have to go back to the replay and listen to the list again. But you've done a lot. Now, you being the very shy, timid guy that you are, how did you figure out how to properly balance all that? Because listen, if you're walking in, like running into the room to start a podcast or jumping around while you're trying to talk, like that doesn't translate well, right? So how have you been able to really figure out that balance on the way of the right energy to bring, the right skills to bring from different things? Does my question make sense? I'm moving on a little bit with it, or going on a little too much.
Yeah, I think I got where you are. So first of all, I understand the medium because I've been in recording booths. So you want to talk about the broad history, and Barbie, to your point too, I was in a Juno-nominated band for a while. You know, I've been in recording studios as a musician. I've been in a recording studio as doing ADR work for film. I used to do radio voiceovers for a while. So I've been in front of a mic, and so I know how to do this part of it. And I know that if I'm doing radio, I do need to be still. You know, we don't want clothes that crinkle. I also know that I'm very animated, that if you want to get the best recording of me vocally, that I need to be able to move. I need to be able to free myself. So I always laugh when I get the list from a host and they insist that you have, you know, a Blue Yeti, and, you know, you have to have this podcast mic. And I'm like, well, I have a really good lapel. It's a high quality lapel. It cost me $200. It's directional. You were complaining yourself, Alex, about, you know, the lawnmower guy outside. We couldn't hear it because you have a good mic. What you guys don't know is right now I'm getting fiber optic cable run into my house, and literally 5 feet that way, there is a drill going off that I can barely hear you guys over. But I promise you, you can't hear them hydrovacing and drilling through my house because I've got a decent mic that is directional and does good sound compression. So these are all things that I learned. And I know to have a good backdrop. I know you guys can't see it, but I have 2 fill lights to the side that are filling the background so that I don't have shadows behind me. I have a big ring light in front of me, gives my face some decent lighting. It needs the help these days. And now I can have my high def camera on, and I can have movement. So I can move without making disruption in the sound, and I can bring myself to the show, or I can bring myself to the presentation. And it's one of the things that Jesse had pointed out. He said that authenticity wins. I would take it one further, and I would say authenticity is synonymous with self-awareness. If you want to be really good on a show, you need to know who you are, what your messaging is. All the pillars that Jesse talked about are critical. But the only way that you can know that is to really truly know yourself and who you are and how you present. And that's why I think am as successful as I am, because not only do I have a message to bring, but I've also got 35 years of industry experience on how to make it look good. And we are into a point where we're in a visual and audio medium. So I have a really good mix board that goes into my system. So I'm doing a pre-mix for my host when they don't even know it. I've got good lighting. I've got a very clean background so that if they want to use it, they're always going to get this neutral gray, no matter what. And then if they want to use it however they need to, they can crop in. It's not busy for their audience's eyes if they are doing a visual one. And then if it's just an audio podcast, I'm giving them the quality audio, but I'm also giving them a performance. So I'm bringing my full body. I can lean into a camera and you can hear when I get excited. And so I'm taking everything, every bit of my story, every bit of my training, every bit of my history, every learning lesson that I have, and I bring it every time to every presentation that I do.
That's great, man. I really like that. And I think that for some of us, like myself included, who I don't have the same experience you do, I've had to learn this stuff and to find that voice, similar to how Jesse was when he got started. Like when he started podcasting, I know maybe some of your upbringing, maybe you've been on stages a lot and stuff, but you had to kind of learn how it translated into this. At least Jesse did. And Tyler, it seems like your whole life you've been conditioning for what is now a podcasting world, right? For those of us that might not be in that space, we shouldn't hold off from getting started, right? We should still get out there, or should we seek help? What's your advice on that before we move along?
Well, so first of all, there's a ton of really good tutorials out there. I mean, you do a Google search, even on YouTube, you know, how do I look good on camera? How do I sound good on a podcast? There are hundreds, if not thousands of videos that will tell you. I know, I mean, it's one of the first things that I talk about in all of my training sessions with my private coaching clients. You know, if you want to be a speaker, you got to be a speaker and understand that it's a business and it takes stuff. And the thing is too, this isn't expensive. I knew what I needed. And so this entire rigging, my entire studio setup is under $500. And that's Canadian. So for you or Yankees down south of the border, that's like, you know, $30.
That's right, man. Good point. Hey, I want to transition with a different question for you here because you've been on a lot of podcasts. I don't know how many you've been on to date. Do you keep track of that? Do you have any clue how many it's been?
Yes, I keep it in a spreadsheet. In the last 2 months, it is 78 and an audience reach of 547,839 if people aren't lying on their Podmatch profiles.
Well done, sir. Well done. So here's my question, because along those lines, you've been asked questions that aren't good. And this will also be a transition to talk to Travis in a minute here as well. But you've been asked questions that aren't good. And I'll give an example of one. And I don't want this to offend any podcast because I've asked this a lot. But if you get the wrong guest, they're going to answer this wrong. Tell us about yourself when it gets started. Yeah. If you have the wrong guest, they're going to talk for 20 minutes about their childhood, their business, and whatever else they have going on. When you get asked questions like that, how do you answer them to, again, as you and Jesse have been saying, to keep it really focused and on task? Can you just explain a little bit how, because I know you've been asked that question and many others, can you explain how you go about positioning those to actually add value?
Well, so the first thing is to do the research. I always appreciate a host that does like a pre-interview. And a pre-interview is not just for a host to learn about a guest. A guest needs to use that to learn about the host. When the host asks, it's kind of like when you're in a job interview and the interviewer says, "Do you have any questions about us?" You better have questions about them, because you need to be able to serve their audience. So that's usually my first question. How can I best serve your audience? What is going to be the best information to give? So that when somebody asks me about myself and, tell us a little bit about you. Well, now I can focus on what that little bit about me is going to be. Am I talking about, self-development, my time working with Les Brown and the work that I've done with the Power Success Group and bringing Tony Robbins to Canada? That's something that I can riff about. That's a little bit about me. Are we talking about overcoming adversity? So I talk about my stroke or my father's passing. Are we talking about entertainment and how to be a better presenter? And then I do a little bit of, I was in film and television, and for the last 35 years, I've done this. And now I've found this perfect passion where I get to teach people how to do what I do, right? So that everybody has a little bit about themselves. And to Barbie's point, I know that Jesse made a really good point to her. Your whole story is your whole story, but know which part of it we need to focus on right now. And that's all I do is I check with my host ahead of time. Even if it's just the 2 minutes up front, I always want to know. So if I could get one message to your audience, what is that? And that is usually a really good indicator of what they're looking for the whole interview, whether it's a 30-minute one or a 60-minute one. What is the one message that I can give to your audience? Because I'm here to make the host look good. The host is there to make me look good, but neither one of us looks good if the audience isn't being served. So that's my number one focus. That's my number one goal.
That's great, man. I love the way you just ended that there. I've got a lot more questions to ask you, but before I do that, I'm going to open it up to anybody else. Does anybody have any questions for Tyler they'd like to ask? I'm not seeing anybody raise their hand this time. That means you did a good job, man. When no one has a question, it means you just nailed it. So great job. Tyler, we're going to circle back to you in a minute. I'm going to jump over to Travis now because we just asked about how Tyler answers bad questions. I love the response that you gave. Think about the audience that's listening. Know who the audience is, have an idea. Travis, can you talk to us about asking good questions? Because you've been at this for over 10 years. How you built Pod Deck, so you know how to ask good questions. How have you been able to build a list of good questions to ask? And is there a certain formula or framework that you recommend following? I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So, I think with questions, with interview podcasts, there's a lot of interview podcasts. And so a couple things that you want to do when you're a podcast host and even a guest is you want to really create an episode that's worth listening to. So an author may come on and say, I want to hit, 78 podcasts with 574,000 people this month, Tyler. And and they're just going to go do the circuit. They're going to go do every single podcast. So their name is in all these search results. Their name is on all over these podcasts. But what is going to differentiate your interview from the rest of the pack? And that all comes down to a few components. So first of all, I really recommend, and everyone here, Jesse, Tyler, and Alex will tell you, do some research about your guest, because you never want to just say, so tell me about yourself and let them just kind of ramble on. You really want to have a plan for that episode. It's probably the most important part. But the second kind of fold of that is really that you want to create a situation where you know your audience is the hero of the journey and you want to serve them, but you want to get your guest to create and elicit an emotional response. So this comes from the host. This comes from the guest. We talked about authenticity and transparency. There's a reason that Joe Rogan and Dak Shepard and all these guys are at the top of the charts every single week is because not only are they exposing, emotions and authenticity, but they get their guests to do the same thing. So if you think about a question, the perfect analogy is an iceberg, right? You've got the tip of the iceberg, you've got where the ice breaks through the water, which is your icebreaker. And then you've got this gigantic piece that goes way deeper under the ocean that you don't really see. And those are deep questions, right? So I really focus on creating questions or curating questions that will either elicit an emotional response, B, be something that can be put into a category, but not necessarily the same questions people ask. So for example, most people get an author on their podcast and they'll say, I've been thinking about writing a book. What made you write this book, right? It's a very basic icebreaker question, in my opinion. A better way to phrase that question to elicit that emotional response is something like, writing a book is an extremely immense task. Was there ever a point in your creation of this book where you felt like quitting? And so they may have not have thought of quitting, but there's probably some obstacle that they can describe in a way that's going to elicit a little more of an emotional response from them, which creates really great episodes, as opposed to just everyone thinks they can write a book. Of course, I'm going to be able to answer that question. So I think those two things together are really powerful when you put research and questions. And I love that Jesse mentioned, like, sometimes you got to go off script. You can't just have a standard list of questions. You have to be able to flex and thread the needle back to where you want to be. So it's really important to be prepared, to be quick on your feet. And, honestly, Alex, I was just joking around with a friend the other day that on Podmatch, if you had a list or a top ranked list of people who have passed on guests, I would be at the top of that list because, like Jesse, I'm really focused on making sure that my guest actually is relevant to my audience. And I think it's really important to ask yourself that question before you book any guest is, how does this serve my audience? Do they have something specific that's going to actually enrich their lives? And how can we build an episode together, as opposed to you just coming and I put together an episode? Let's collaborate and make this like the most amazing episode that somebody can listen to and get value from through my niche. So I hope that helped elaborate sort of on the thought process of a question, Alex.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, just the way you ask that question is great. And it gets past the standard responses, right? I'm going to pick on somebody right now who's not here. At least I don't think he's here. Anyone ever heard of Matthew McConaughey, though? He's one of the most famous people on the planet, so he's going to get made fun of a little bit or picked on a little bit. But he had a book come out last year called Green Lights, and he did like the podcast circuit, which is great that he did that. And at first I was like, man, this is really cool. I want to hear what he has to say. So I listened to a few episodes that he shared. They were exactly the same. I mean, there was no getting past. I mean, this guy has built up years of resistance of breaking that standard mold, right? And again, not trying to pick on him. They were all really good, but it was like, how can you, and this is a question for you now, Travis, how can you break that mold if you find a guest is just like, they're clearly on autopilot, I guess is the best way I can say it. Like they've kind of got their basic responses in. You already asked a really good question instead of like, was there a tough point? Because I feel like that would kind of get that emotion going. But like you're saying, you want that emotional response, but how have you been able to break through it? Like, let's say you don't have the script, you've done your research, but you're trying to get through it. Like, is there any certain questions you're like, hey, these work every time?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on, what your audience is all about. But like, I think that there's, we discussed what happens, Barbie mentioned, what happens when we get off topic, right? And I think the number one rule in improv is that you never say no. So I think sometimes it's actually beneficial to, put people in a position where there's a little more spontaneity. And so developing a list of questions that is not necessarily in line exactly with the messaging of the podcast can really absolutely help you kind of steer off course a little bit to actually get back on course, if that makes any sense. I might not be explaining this in the right way, but asking Matthew McConaughey the same 5 questions about, Dazed and Confused and his movie experience and all these things is great. And you're going to get those same answers. But there may be a whole nother layer to Matthew McConaughey that you can expand upon and actually have it more of an improv experience to take your episode and make it different. And that's where some of these other questions may come in, as far as, the categories we have in pod decks, which are more just about, philosophy or, life experiences and things that just people are not focused on asking because they're so pigeonholed into just making sure that they hit the sort of same pillars that everybody else hits in the podcast.
That's good. I like that a lot. Barbie, you have a question? I'm gonna let you jump in real quick.
Yeah, that's so true, Travis. And I think that for a time, I had an agent that was booking that circuit for me. And so he would have everything in a list and he would give it to the host, and the host would ask the question exactly as written or submitted to them. If the host could ask the question in a slightly different way, it would elicit a whole different response, and then you wouldn't get those canned responses every time that are exactly as everybody or with Matthew McConaughey. I've been in interviews like that where I'm like saying the same exact thing over and over. I'm like, I have to switch this up, but it depends on how the host asks the question, which if you're given a list, if you're a superstar like Matthew McConaughey, you're going to be given a list of what to ask him, and you're not supposed to vary too much. So that's why his answer doesn't vary too much.
Yeah. So those are what I call carbon copy interviews, right? And that's why I don't, people have, I'm a fan of Alex's podcast because of the way he hosts his podcast, but I'll use John Lee Dumas as an example. Alex has interviewed John Lee Dumas. He's big in the podcasting world. I'll never interview John Lee Dumas unless I can have a real conversation where we might actually disagree on things. And one of the tactics that I've sometimes used in podcasting is to ask a question to my guest, what I think would be the most valuable question they can answer, and then really just politely disagree and go the other way. And what that does is that creates the contrast, politely, that creates an exciting episode, right? People watch reality TV. We'll use Barbie as an example. What do people like on reality TV? They like that sort of drama, right? So if you can insert just a devil's advocate into your responses, right? Even if you agree, can you take the other side of the coin and reframe the question or put some insight into it to actually spark an actual conversation about both sides? Again, we talked about kind of communication. I think that's what really makes a great episode is maybe two people don't agree. That's, one of the reasons I don't hang around Clubhouse too much is because everybody is just echoing and agreeing on the exact same thing over and over again. And we create this loop where we don't really get any information. I think that, you can just play devil's advocate with your guest and get a really great episode, as opposed to being like, yeah, I love that. That's great. That's awesome. And then move to the next carbon copy question. And really, again, we're trying to set ourselves apart. We're trying to get new information, a new experience for our audience. So I think that's also a strategy you can use, is just simply the devil's advocate model.
That's really good. Jesse, you had something you wanted to ask, or you had a comment to add, I guess.
Yeah, several things. First of all, Barbie, I saw your husband back there. Tell him I said hello. Second thing, I believe that as guests, we have a responsibility too. So if we're getting these carbon copy questions, we have a responsibility to be creative in how we answer these questions, right? And so, especially if you already have a list of questions that you sent to the guest, one thing that I've learned as a speaker and as a coach, that even though I may have a specific presentation or a specific talk or speech, as I'm living, I can add more content to this, right? And so I take the same approach when it comes through for podcast interviews too. Yes, they already have the questions. I know what they're going to ask most of the time, but it's my responsibility to make the conversation flow. And so I may add in a story that I didn't have the last podcast, or I may add in a statistic that I didn't have the last podcast, right? And so making sure that we keep it interesting as well. And the last thing, I know I said two, but it's really three. The last thing as a host, and we're talking about having rich conversation. And Travis, I'm going to invest in your product, sir, because I like what you're doing. I love this part right here. I love when I ask a question and I get this. And the guest has to think. Because what it does is it takes them off the rail. It's a break in the conversation for the listener. And it requires the guest to go deeper and really think about how they want to ask this question. How they want to answer this question. I'm all about rhythm. So the fact that I just did that right now, it kind of broke the rhythm of this whole conversation, right? Because Travis's speaking pattern is like, he's a AK-47, right? Right? Tyler, he's more of a Great Dane. He's like, yeah, I've been here before. I know what I'm talking about, right? And so we have different speech patterns, but when you take a break and you let that rest, it gives the audience an opportunity to take in what was just said.
Man,
Absolutely.
that's good. Travis, you got something to counteract with that or talk to
Oh,
the same
I
point?
think that there's so much power in silence. I hear a lot of podcasts edited to where it's just everything is connected. So there's no breaths, there's no pauses, nothing lands. It's just like, let's try to jam this thing together. And, anytime somebody says something like, wow, that's a great question, you have them on their heels. They're actually thinking, they're not on autopilot anymore. And that's where you start to get things out of them that they're not sharing on all the other podcasts. And that's what makes your episode different. And that's what can absolutely turn into a spontaneous conversation where they share something with you that they'd never shared before. Did anybody get Matthew McConaughey to share anything that he'd never shared before? That would be the episode that people would be talking about, right? And that's the position we want to be in as potentially as a podcast host, depending on what our audience is all about.
So I got to question you guys on this one personally. So I'm the guy, and Travis, you've heard my podcast, and it's pretty tight as far as like not having a lot of gaps. The space feels awkward to me, so I usually will try to just fill it. If I'm like getting them to think too much, I'm like, or answer it this way, right? How have you? And maybe you guys are naturals at this. I am not. How do you learn to deal with that silence and just be quiet, knowing that I guess if it's too long, you can edit out a little bit of it. But how have you been able to just kind of sit back and be like, okay, take a breath. It's okay to be silent for a second, because that's still a struggle for me because I talk fast and my show, like you've heard, it's straight to the point every single time. I'd love for any of you guys just open up as a panel here to talk to that point.
Yeah, for me, because I do most of mine via Zoom, I can see the person. So that really helps me to embrace the silence because it's a real conversation. I know that when we're done, I'm going to edit it, but in a moment, I want to get as much richness as possible. So that's one main reason why I do it on Zoom, is just to see the person. You can do whatever you want to do in post, but in the conversation, really embracing that silence and not being afraid of it. Because again, we're trying to duplicate a natural conversation. This is natural. It's not overly produced. We're just talking at a coffee shop, right? And then if you get that kind of rhythm, that kind of vibe in the conversation, it just makes it so much richer.
I would agree. I think Jesse is really nailed it with the rhythm analogy. I think of podcast production, I have a musical background, and so I think of it as musical. Like a silence is the dynamics in a conversation, and songs get real big and then they get real quiet and you create these dynamics. But if everything's squished together, it's actually fatiguing for the listener. You need a second to sometimes digest something. So Alex, if you just in your head, 2, 3, 4, just think of it musically, rhythmically, as you let a moment land, right? It's just like why people say right? So I just did a post on why people say it's because they're afraid of silence. They're afraid to take a beat and think. And so they say and then the host has to cut those all out. But if you just take a minute and let something land and think, you actually sound more intelligent when you speak. It's one of these magical things that happens when you can just stop and let something breathe. And it's really great from a dynamic standpoint. I think of podcasting as an art form, storytelling as an art form, and jamming it all together. It would be like watching a movie where they took out all the dramatic pauses. It would be a fast cut mania, and you would never want to watch that. So that's my thought process: is rhythmic music, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, I recently just came across I read the Bible every day. It's something I do. I've been going through Proverbs, and there's a verse that says, even a fool is considered wise if he keeps his mouth shut. And I'm trying to take that one to heart. Not calling myself a fool, but I'm like, man, if even a fool seems smart, maybe if I can just stop saying or filling in the gaps, maybe I do a little better. So thanks for that. Tyler, do you have something to add before we move on to a question that Barbie has?
Oh yeah. Well, and actually I want to address Barbie's question as a second part to that. So first one, don't be afraid of pauses. I have an entire section of my book is dedicated to the power of pause and allowing it to sink. So all I would be is an echo chamber for everything that Jesse and Travis have already said. But there is value in it, particularly as a guest, because as a host, you're asking Q questions, then I'm going to respond. So if you as a guest can get comfortable with taking a pause, and if you as a host can get comfortable with allowing them to do it, that's where, as Travis pointed out, there's a rhythm. And I love his music analogy. As a drummer, I know it, right? So I'm gonna finish off a phrase with a kick drum and a crash hit. And then we're gonna wait. I'm gonna silence it. I'm gonna grab that cymbal and I'm gonna wait for it because it allows it to sit, right? And that's when your audience perks up. They go, oh, it's a pattern disrupt. And it allows your audience to know that, hey, I need to lean in, because they will. People will be driving in their car, they'll be listening, and they'll go, because they're not used to the silence, and it perks them up. So that's when you know important information is coming. So don't shy away from it. And then to Barbie's question about matching host's energy, I would say it depends on the show. If there's a host whose energy it feels natural to match, then I will. Like, I know if I'm talking with Alex, my pace of my voice goes to this. I get really into it. I get really jazzed. I know that if I was interviewing with Jesse, I can tell you right now, we'd be a little bit more laid back, and I would probably end up actually lowering my register even just to try and match that chocolatey silk smoothie voice that we've got going from the Reverend Jesse Cole. You know what I mean? Like you can tell that's a pastor's son right there. Like, after everything that he says, I want to yell amen. It's just how every sentence you've had, Jesse, every statement you've made, that's how I've wanted to finish it. But there are times where you get a host who is just struggling, making Stephen Wright seem energetic, and you go, oh, dude, we need to pick this up. And so I will counter, and that's kind of to Travis's point, the best entertainment. And remember, we're entertaining. Ultimately, we're educating and entertaining. The best thing you can do is provide counterbalance. So there are times where I'm going to meet somebody's energy, but there's also times where I'm going to specifically counter it. If somebody is super frenetic, I'm going to be incredibly laid back and relaxed, just to try and get my own breath so I don't feel like I've just done a marathon. And there will be times where somebody is super low key, and I'm going to crank it up because I need to keep their audience awake, because ultimately I need to serve them and get a message out to them. And if the host isn't doing it, I'm going to do it for them. So I think you really have to gain that sixth sense of when it's appropriate. Do you match or do you counter? And if you've got a really good host, they'll be conversational anyway, and it won't be an issue.
That's great. Good stuff. Very cool, guys. Anybody else have any questions for this panel here before we move on to closing this thing out? I've got somebody with their hand up. I can't see your name, though.
That's Paul. That's Paul.
Oh, it's Paul?
Well, Irvine's got one too.
Okay.
Go ahead, Irvine, if you're ready. Okay. How about any advice on creating your podcast as a host that has certain elements? Like sometimes you see people who end their podcast with a book recommendation, or they started out with something, or the listeners know there's always going to be this one question. What do you guys think about trying to format it like that?
If it serves your audience, then absolutely. I mean, it depends on who your audience is. Do they want a book recommendation? Do they want a podcast recommendation, a quote of the day? I love formatted podcasts. I think that formatted podcasts obviously are the ones that are getting purchased by Spotify and Amazon. And there's a reason for that, because they're put together, they're well thought out. And so I encourage my clients and people that I coach, to install pillars of content and separate. Tyler had mentioned, rhythmically and, people leaning into things. What audiences are to be surprised. And you can get into a rhythm where you don't surprise anyone anymore because you don't take any breaths, you don't take any breaks, and it's kind of the same thing over and over again. So if you can install little segments into your show that aren't advertisements, you can create something that people look forward to, that people will come back for. So I'm a big fan of the segmented portions in podcasts, whether that be at the beginning or the end or just all the way through. I think that it's very powerful to add a little transition music or something that, like Tyler mentioned, reappropriates their attention, right? Because if you hear the same thing for more than 10 minutes, your brain is automatically going to start to lose focus unless you're really engaged. So if you introduce a new sound, if you introduce a new segment, you're going to reattach their attention to what you're doing. So you can really use audio in a powerful way to keep people listening all the way through to your podcast.
Travis, I like that, the segmented piece. That's the next level for me. So up until this point, it's been all a good intro, conversation, good outro, send them to the website for more resources, right? And so, but as I've been listening, as you said, Spotify, and I really like Michelle Obama's podcast. Hers is kind of segmented like that, and it has music in there. That's going to be the next step for me, is to begin to do it, still have the same kind of feel, but more segmented. So yeah, that's some good advice, Travis.
Good stuff. And somebody else had a question. Okay, it's on the second page. Go ahead.
Irvin, yeah. So I was interested in what Jesse had said about the difference between the pre-interview and sometimes the interview. And I had this experience this morning where I had a pre-interview. It was delightful. And the host said to me, "Oh, I wish that we recorded this." And I know sometimes when you press the on button, it introduces a formality that kind of gets away from the coffee house feel. So just kind of a two-part. One is just something that I observed in a podcast that I was on recently. They turned the on button, but they just talk they said, we're just going to continue talking here, and at some stage we'll drift into into the podcast, which I thought was a great technique. But just the second thing then on that, is there things that you've noticed that are good techniques to try and really get into that conversational feel that is a little more reflective? That's because I'm mostly a guest, so just from that perspective.
Yeah. One thing that I do is before we get on the call, I go look at their social media and see what they've posted. And I have this thing that I have. It's called "You Said," right? And so during our pre-call, I'm like, you know what, Travis, a couple of days ago you said this. Can you talk more about that? Right. So that kind of gets them in the rhythm of the conversation. And if it goes good, I may do the "you said" during the podcast too, because it just felt that good. So that's one thing that I do, is part of my research is seeing what they've posted and then allowing that to guide the conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, people get red light fever. So when they see that red light that's recording, everything changes for them and it becomes real. I use a Rodecaster Pro, which is a recording device, and I can record locally on this, both sides, without ever turning on Zoom or without ever turning the recording button on Zoom. And it's a fun thing to experiment with. I'm sure Tyler's experienced this in the studio. When you're in the recording studio, you could play a perfect take, and then they say, "Okay, we're going to record it," and they press the record button, and everything goes out the window. You're just like, "What happened?" But because there's the formality that you mentioned, screws your mind up. You're like, okay, this is being recorded, this is being documented, and you get in your own head. I think, Irvine, and I want to know which Inside Out character is your favorite, by the way.
So my favorite actually is Sadness.
Okay. All right. That tells me a lot about you. The blue shirt. Okay. I got it. All right, cool. So I think warming someone up, part of, I'm not here to promote a product or anything, but having some questions that have nothing to do with the podcast, warming people up. People come to a podcast as a guest in different states. They may have rushed in from one other meeting. They may be stressed out. They may have just gotten some bad news. They may be hungry. And so if there's anything you can do to sort of massage them and make them feel comfortable, when I had Alex on my podcast, he mentioned, when somebody comes onto my podcast as a guest, is the exact same thing as when they come to my house. I show them around. I let them know where everything is so they feel comfortable. The more comfortable we can make someone feel, the less red light fever they may get. And the more comfortable they are, the more chances we have to, extract something that's real, right? That's an art form of a conversation, as opposed to sort of a sterile, like, okay, we're recording, I'm going to start to ask you questions sort of military style run and gun podcasting. So we want to make people feel comfortable and sort of forget that it's a recorded conversation. That's why that pre-call you had, Jesse, was so amazing, because there was no expectations. There was nothing around it. It was just a free form thing. So if you can figure out ways to make that become a reality before you interview, I think you set yourself up to be in a really great place when it comes down to documenting the conversation. And then finally, I like to make conversations free form and just record them. And then I'll actually cut what I need to make it into an interview. So I never ask somebody to tell me who they are, what they do, or their story. I'll do the research and I will explain that to my audience before the episode. I think it's sort of insulting to have somebody come on your podcast and be like, so tell me, what are you all about? And it's like, okay. I like to do things that I just say, let's just chat and we'll record it. And then I'll cut the pieces and put them into place to make a really great episode. So I think there's ways that you can do it that are not so sterile, that make people feel more comfortable, and you get really great content out of that style of either being a host or a guest.
Thank you.
These are really great points here, guys. And for sake of time, we're gonna have to bring this thing to a close, but I want to say thank you to everyone who has attended, and to Tyler, Travis, and Jesse. Thank you so much for just sharing this wisdom that you shared with us. And I want to quickly, on ending, so we do in just a second here, I just want to hear one last thought on this topic of being a great interviewer, interviewee on podcasts from each of you. And I'm also going to ask you, where can people find out about you? Because we'll make sure that if anyone has any other questions, that they can follow up with you and find you as well. So I'll go first to give you all a few seconds, and then whoever's ready, just go for it. So for me, sometimes I still get nervous on podcasts, even after 100 episodes. Like as a host, sometimes I'm still nervous when it's getting started, but I remind myself of this one thing, and it calms me down every single time. I say, Alex, are you doing this for yourself or for the one listener who needs this episode the most? And when I can remind myself that it's not for me, but it's for that one person, it always calms me down, because my pressure of me doing a good job or whatever it might be is gone. Now it's instead, okay, how can I get this guest to really share something that's going to help this person who really needs it? So that's my one last piece of advice that I'd share that's helped me a lot as someone who still gets nervous after 100 episodes. And for me, everyone knows Podmatch, but you can find me at creatingabrand.com if you want to see my podcast if you haven't. So that's just creatingabrand.com. And I'll pass it over to one of the other guys now.
Well, I might as well jump in, Alex, because what I was going to say is basically an echo of what you were. And that is, whether you are a guest or a host, your message matters. And there's somebody out there who needs to hear the thing that needs to be said. To one of the earlier points, don't be afraid to say the thing that needs to be said. One of the points that I make in my book is that the thing we're afraid to say is probably what our audience needs to hear. So let's get that out there. And if you're looking to get a hold of me in any way, SeanTylerFoley.com is the best way to get me. Sean spelled the proper Irish way, SeanTylerFoley.com. And I think Alex just put up a little link to the method, which is my free download for anybody who wants it, 5 Insider Secrets to be a better public speaker. So I'll turn it over to either Jesse or Travis now.
Well, Jesse, beauty before age, my friend. All right. Well, so I'm going to leave you with two things. One that I had mentioned earlier is I think that there's real value in contrast. So don't be afraid to disagree with someone. I think we get into these like loops of everyone is the best. And if you do have an opinion that is not in line exactly with either your host or your guest, have a conversation about it. It makes for really great content. Secondarily, as a guest, there's something I always do on every episode that absolves us of the weird ending goodbye, which is, well, thanks for being here. Oh, it's so nice to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. It's the worst way to end a show. So when I know what we're getting towards the end of the show, what I'll do is I say, can I just ask a favor of your audience? And the host is always going to say, sure, what is it? I'm going to say, hey, can you do me a favor and just press pause and go give this show a review or a 5-star review or a rating? It really helps people find this podcast, and host is really working hard to create amazing content for you. So if you could just do me that favor, it would be amazing. It's like the best way to end being a guest. It's like cleaning your dishes before you leave a house party, right? A really great way to leave a great impression as the last thing, instead of the awkward, like, thanks for having me. Great to be here. Goodbye. Goodbye. You know what I'm talking about. We've all been there. So try that out as a guest. And then if you want to find me, you can find me at poddex.com, or I spend a lot of time on Instagram at poddex. I do a lot of podcast tips in my posting, and I DM and hang out. And those are two great places to find me. And Alex, thank you so much for having me be a part of this. I feel like really honored, and I'm really excited to find out more about Jesse and Tyler. So thank you.
Yeah, real easy, real easy. Authenticity wins. Whether you're a host or a guest, you cannot lose with authenticity. So show up authentic, and the people will get what they need to get. I always say, I do a prayer before my podcast. Let no word fall to the ground. Let it hit its intended target. Let no word fall to the ground. Let it hit its intended target. And you can accomplish that goal when you are authentic. You can find out more about me at kingdommogulcoaching.com. The books are there. The podcast is there. You get to learn more about my story there as well.
Love it, guys. This has been a lot of fun. Travis, Jesse, Tyler, thank you so much. And for everyone attending, we're going to be posting this on YouTube so a lot of people can catch up with it as well. But thank you again, everyone, for being here. Really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.